Assalamu alaikum. How is everyone? I hope you are well. So in our lesson today, we are going to discuss classification. Now, classification is one of the easiest topics in biology. So it's actually divided into two. We have classification 1 and classification 2. So classification 1 is taught in Form 1, but let's be honest, there's very little content there. Now, classification 2 builds on the foundation taught in classification 1 and expands on it. Now, even with more content provided in classification 2, it's really one of the easiest topics in biology. Plus, it's also fun to learn about the different organisms belonging in their various kingdoms. So in this lesson of ours, we are going to discuss several questions on classification in depth. On to our first question. The diagram below indicates an organism that grows under shaded place with damp conditions. Study it and answer the questions that follow. Okay. So if we look at our diagram, we can see that we have an organism that somewhat resembles a plant. Actually, it does look like a plant because if you look closer, you are going to note that it has structures that look like leaves and root-like structures. Plus, it's also green in color. This shows us that it has the green pigment, which is chlorophyll, and most plants contain chlorophyll. So the image that we are seeing here is of an organism known as a fern. So fern belongs to a group of plants called Pteridophytes. Let's pause there. When we talk about kingdom Plantae, okay, this is a kingdom that is further divided into 3 divisions. We have Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, and Gametophyta. Now, do you remember the 7 taxa that you were taken through in Form 1? Starting with kingdom, phylum, class, so on until we reach the last and smallest taxa, which is the species? Yes. Now, after kingdom, we have phylum. But in the case of plants, instead of us using the term phylum, we replace it with division. It's essentially the same thing. Lakini tunaita division. So kingdom Plantae is divided into 3 divisions: Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, and Angiospermophyta. Now, bryophytes are very simple plants, okay? They have simple, undifferentiated bodies, and they also lack the vascular system. What do I mean by the vascular system? I simply referring to, xylem and phloem. So they don't have these. So you might be wondering, okay, so if they don't have xylem and phloem for transportation of materials, how do they manage? They rely on physiological processes such as diffusion and osmosis. Okay, now they can do so because these are plants that tend to be very limited in size. They are very, very small, as you can clearly see. A very good example of this are mosses. You might have seen this, by the way. They tend to grow in areas that are moist and damp too. Okay, now moving on to the second division, and that is Pteridophyta. Now, plants that belong in this division are more evolved, okay, they are more complex, and they are vascular. So they have the vascular system, the xylem and phloem. But they don't produce seeds, okay? They produce spores, yeah. Now, the last division is the most evolved of all. They have well-developed vascular systems, and they also bear seeds. A lot of the plants that we see in our, surroundings tend to belong in this division. So back to our image. This is a fern. And as the question states, such plants usually grow in moist, shaded environments, often found in forests or even along river banks. Now, part A. Name the division to which the specimen belongs to. This is, of course, going to be Pteridophyta. B. Name and state the functions of the parts labeled Q, R, and S. Okay, so what the question requires from us is that, number 1, we identify, okay, these labeled parts and then state their respective functions. So starting with Q, that is the adventitious root. And just like with any other roots, it has 2 main functions. Function number 1 is anchorage. When we talk about anchorage, this is whereby you're going to have roots helping, to firmly anchor the plant to the substrate. This could be the soil, rock, or, any other part. Now, sometimes students, when asked about functions of roots, state that the function of the root is to hold the plant firmly. It's to provide support. Please don't do that. Just state anchorage. As a point, this word is independent by itself. There's no need for you to go in further and explain unless you've been specifically told to do so. Okay. Now, the second part is absorption of water and mineral salts. Another thing to remind you, students sometimes just write absorption, which is wrong. You have to specify that it's the absorption of water and mineral salts. Okay, so that is Q. Let us move on to R. Now, if we look at R is the rhizome. Let's pause there. I'm going to explain what a rhizome is. But before I do that, I want to state there is a difference between a rhizome and a rhizoid, okay? Rhizoids tend to be found underground, and they usually perform functions similar to roots, okay? Anchorage, absorption, and so on. A rhizome is a specialized type of stem, okay? It grows horizontally and underground. Now, most stems tend to grow upwards into the air. A rhizome grows horizontally, usually just beneath the soil surface, but sometimes deeper. So just to make this clear, a rhizome is a modified stem and not a root, even though it might typically be found beneath the soil surface. So what is the function of a rhizome? Number one, you have storage. So it's used to store food substances like starch for the plant. So this enables the plant to, survive during unfavorable conditions such as dry seasons. Number two, it's used for vegetative propagation. So rhizomes are a common way through which plants reproduce sexually, okay? So what will happen is that you are going to have new shoots, okay, stems, growing from the nodes along the rhizome. These shoots lead to the formation of new identical plants that can either still be connected to the parent plant or, they can break off from the parent plant and grow into new individuals. So this allows the plants to reproduce and spread very quickly. By the way, many common plants utilize rhizomes. Let me give a few examples. Ginger, tangawizi. Yeah, the part we eat is actually the rhizome. How amazing is that? And then you have turmeric, manjano, and even grasses, by the way. You might have seen this in grasses. Tuendele. Part S. S is the sorus. So plural is sorry, but since it's just pointing at one, this is sorus. So the function, of course, is production of spores. Now, what is a sorus? A sorus is a group of sporangia, okay? Now, sporangia are structures that produce and contain spores. So spores are found within the sporangia. Actually, they're produced in the sporangia. They're stored there until mature. Now, when you have groups of sporangia, that is what a sorus is. So these are usually found on the underside of the leaf, on the lower surface of the leaf. Let us proceed to part C. Name two body forms of the organism in its alternation of generation. So we have two main body forms, okay, generations, in the life cycle of the fern. Number one, we have the sporophyte, and number two, we have the gametophyte. Now, let us discuss this. First things first, what is alternation of generations? This is a fundamental characteristic of the life cycle of all plants, okay? So it refers to a life cycle whereby you are going to have a plant alternating between two forms, okay? A haploid form called the gametophyte and a diploid form called the sporophyte. Okay. I want you to picture this. Imagine a plant is an actor, okay? An actor, yes, like that. And it has two main characters. Each of these characters performs a different role throughout the life cycle of the plant. We have the gametophyte coming in at some point, the sporophyte then maybe coming on at another point. So this is essentially what we call alternation of generations. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I am going to discuss the two, the sporophyte and the gametophyte. So let us start with the sporophyte. Now, this is what we usually recognize as the fern itself, okay? That it's the dominant form of the fern's life cycle. What is its job? Simple, to produce spores. So on the underside of mature fronds, let's pause there. What is a frond? A frond simply refers to the leaves of the ferns, okay? Now, when they are mature, they produce spores. So on the underside of these fronds, you are going to have small brown clusters, you know, like structures. These are what we call sori. Remember sori, just mentioned them? Okay. Now, each sorus is made up of sporangia that produce spores. So you have the sporophyte, which is the whole plant. On the underside, on the lower surface of mature leaves, you are going to have sori. In each sorus, you are going to have sporangia, and these sporangia are the ones that produce spores. Now, when the spores mature and the conditions are dry enough, the sporangia burst open and forcefully release the spores into the air. Now, these spores are small. They are also light, so they are easily dispersed by wind. And if they land on a suitable, moist surface, like maybe damp soil, they can germinate to form a small heart-shaped structure called the prothallus. This will now be our gametophyte. Sawa? Yeah. So from the sporophyte, we got spores. From the spores, we ended up having the gametophyte. Now, the main job of the gametophyte is to produce sex cells. These are what we call the gametes. And of course, we are going to have female gametes and male gametes, right? Now, the prothallus, nakumbuka the prothallus, the heart-shaped structure, okay? This is going to have the antheridia and archegonia, okay? Now, antheridia produces male gametes. Archegonia produces female gametes. Let's pause there. From the sporophyte, we got spores. From the spores, we got the prothallus, right? Remember, the spores germinated and they led to the formation of the prothallus, which we now call our gametophyte. Gametophyte na yeye akafanya nini? Akaproduce male and female gametes. But these gametes come from specific structures within the prothallus, the antheridium and the archegonium. Now, these two gametes will then fuse together, okay? So you're going to have the fusion of the male and female gametes, resulting in the formation of a zygote. Now, this zygote will then develop into a new sporophyte. Just look at this, by the way. And this is what we call alternation of generations, because we are actually having, you know, a change of life cycle from a sporophyte to a gametophyte, back to a sporophyte, and so on. So the sporophyte leads to the formation of the gametophyte. The gametophyte then leads to the formation of the sporophyte, and so on. So this is what we refer to as alternation of generation, and it's typical characteristic of all plants. By the way, if you are enjoying our lesson, feel free to look up for more revision materials in my channel called Cyclic. I hope to see you there. Moving on to our next question. So we are told to study the diagrams below and answer the questions that follow. Okay, so we have 3 diagrams of different organisms. Now, all of these 3 organisms are going to belong to phylum Arthropod. You may ask why. Well, it's clearly visible why, right? But let's just state it. Number 1, they are all covered by an exoskeleton. Number 2, their bodies are segmented, okay? They're divided into segments. And number 3 is that they have appendages that are jointed. Now, this is very visible with organism Z. Mwangalie huyo crab. You can clearly see that the limbs are jointed at points. So, now all of these are characteristics of animals that belong to phylum Arthropod. So Roman 1, to which phylum does organisms X and Y and Z belong to? We've answered that. That is Arthropoda. Roman number 2, name the classes to which X, Y, and Z belongs to. Okay, now all of these belong to the same phylum as stated. However, due to further differences in their structures, they are further classified into classes. So let's start with X. Now X is a tick. This of course belongs to class Arachnida. Now arachnids are characterized by having 8 legs. Si tunaona maguya. So you're going to have 4 pairs, 4 legs on one side, 4 on the other side. They have a body that is divided into 2 main parts. We have the cephalothorax and the abdomen. Okay, and they also lack an antenna. So the tick fits all of these characteristics. Moving on to the second organism labeled Y. This is clearly a bee, specifically a honeybee. Now the class is going to be Insecta. What is our reason for this? Insects are characterized by having 3 pairs of legs. Simnaona, it has a body divided into 3 main parts, which is also clearly visible. We have the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. They also have 1 pair of antennae, kama mnavyoona, and usually have wings. Although a few insects lack wings, like the lice, but most have them. So a bee perfectly fits this criteria. Haya, tuende to the last organism, which is the crab. It belongs to class Crustacea. These are characterized by having 2 pairs of antennae, and they typically have 5 or more pairs of legs. Aya, that was an easy question, by the way. Interesting too. Aya, tunaendelea. We are moving on to question 3. State 2 characteristics of kingdom Monera that are not found in other kingdoms. Now, when we talk about characteristics that are found in the different kingdoms, sometimes there might be an overlap. You might have one characteristic of organisms found in one kingdom that is also present in another. This question specifically tells us to only focus on characteristics that are unique to kingdom Monera, to bacteria, okay? So we have 3. Number 1, they are prokaryotic. This is actually the most fundamental and defining characteristic of bacteria. So bacteria are the only organism whose cells have genetic material that is not surrounded by a membrane. All the other 4 kingdoms are eukaryotic. So eukaryotic means that the nuclear material is surrounded by a membrane. For example, in our case, we have the nucleus surrounded by the nuclear membrane. Bacteria lack, a nuclear membrane, and therefore are referred to as prokaryotic. Now, another characteristic is that they lack membrane-bound organelles like the mitochondria. So any organelle that we know of that has a double membrane, like the mitochondria, you have the Golgi bodies. These are absent in bacteria, and that is the reason why they tend to have only few organelles within their cells. Last one is that they have a cell wall. Yes. Now, a cell wall is a characteristic that is found in various organisms, okay? So, bacteria have a cell wall, that is kingdom Monera. When it comes to kingdom Protoctista, some also have a cell wall. Kingdom Fungi, yes, they do have a cell wall. Plantae, of course, but the difference between them is the component of the cell wall. So when it comes to bacteria, it's not that they have a cell wall, it's that their cell wall is made up of murine. So murine is actually a compound that contains a mix of complex sugars and proteins. So when you talk about the cell wall of bacteria, usiandike kwamba they have a cell wall, but their cell wall is not made of cellulose. Be specific. State that they have a cell wall that is made of murine. In some books, it's referred to as peptidoglycan. It's the same thing. Moving on to our next question. The diagram below shows the gametophyte of a fern. Now, I like this question because it's actually a continuation of the first question that we did. So it's going to put all of that, hopefully, into a better understanding for you. So we have the gametophyte of a fern, specifically a structure called a prothallus. Do you remember? Nilisema a simple, small, heart-shaped structure called a prothallus. Doesn't it fit that characteristic? It does. So, as we discussed before, the gametophyte is responsible for production of gametes. Okay? Now, the prothallus plays an important role in sexual reproduction. Okay? Because it contains the reproductive organs which produce the gametes. So, let us start first of all with the labeling, and then we are going to come back to these reproductive organs. Part A. Now, part A is known as the apical notch. This region contains meristematic cells, okay? These are cells that are going to actively divide. You know, they're going to divide so very quickly, leading to the growth of the prothallus itself. Aya, tunaendelea to part B. Part B is the archegonium, okay? Let's see. Since it's, it's touching one, yes, so it's going to be archegonium, okay? This is the female reproductive organ where the egg is produced. Now, as you can see, there are several actually, archegonia, several structures as such, but one is archegonium. Okay, part C, that is the antheridium, okay? So the antheridium is the male reproductive organ. This is where sperms are produced. So the small circular structures that you see there are the antheridium, in plural, of course. And D, that is a rhizoid. I want to state that that is a rhizoid and not rhizoids because it's clearly pointing at one. Now, this is usually, a common mistake that students make, whereby they either use it in singular or plural terms when it's pointing at either. Please be very careful with that. Okay, tunaendelea. Define the term alternation of generations. Now, we've talked about this, so I'll just give the definition. This is the existence of an organism in two forms. These two forms alternate with each other during the life cycle of an organism. Now, in plants, you're going to have the gamete-producing form. This is the gametophyte. And you're going to have the sporophyte that produces spores. Next question. Name two plant divisions that exhibit alternation of generations. So, all plants show this. So, we can say Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, or Angiospermophyta. All are correct. State three features that make ferns more advanced than most plants. Now, moss belong to Bryophyta. And as stated before, this is the least evolved division. Okay? So, ferns belong to Pteridophyta and are therefore more evolved, more developed. Now, we are supposed to justify this statement, give reasons why ferns will be more developed than moss. So, number one, the presence of vascular tissues. Ferns have xylem and phloem, okay? So xylem, of course, is for transport of water and phloem for transport of dissolved food substances. Moss lack vascular bundles. So they rely on diffusion and osmosis for absorption and transport of materials. Now, because of this, mosses cannot grow big, okay? They are, they grow to very small sizes and they tend to be restricted to environments that are moist, okay? Yeah. Ferns, on the other hand, can grow larger and colonize drier habitats. Another reason is that when it comes to ferns, ferns have true roots, stems, and leaves, okay? So their bodies are differentiated into true roots, stems, and leaves. Mosses, on the other hand, have bodies that are undifferentiated, okay? Their bodies are usually simple and are referred to as thyroid. And that is that. Now that brings us to the end of our revision lesson. Now I will see you during our next class. If you have any recommendations, kindly follow them up.